So I got the valve covers off to start cleaning on them, and found one of the cleanest engines I've ever had. So this, besides the gasket surface, hopefully you can see it, it's just like a light tan, but that is the cleanest engine I've ever had, and this one's got about 191,000 miles on it, so I think this one's going to be a very, very nice engine. Should last a long time, and not bad for I probably don't owe anything on it. I sold everything off for the truck, so the engine's basically free to me. You remember from the last video what the valve covers looked like, so all I basically did was take them off, pull the gaskets and the studs out, the bolts out, hit them with degreaser and a scrub brush in water in my sink, and that's what they look like. They're not factory brand new, but being hid behind everything, I think they're going to look really good. So I'll let these dry a day or two, put some new gaskets on them, clean up the hardware, and reinstall them. And there we go. So just cleaned up the valve covers, put new gaskets on, cleaned up these seals because they weren't torn or anything, put them back on, made sure everything was dry, and it looks like almost a new engine. So we'll keep going. So here you can see I've installed the little bracket I made up. It's just a little fixture to lock the crank in place. So if I had the engine out of the vehicle, I can do that. And then somebody also gave me one that you take the starter out and it hooks to the flywheel if it's actually in the vehicle. So I pulled the old bell housing off that I just used to mount them in the test stand. Took the flywheel off and put a couple bolts in, snugged them down good. And then I'll use a 15/16 is what I have, and we will see if we can get this broke off without killing myself. I should explain why I'm removing the harmonic balancer. So this is a truck engine, of course, it's 5.3, and they have which is called a positive 1.5" offset. So probably some reference surface on the head or the front of the block. It's 1.5" longer than what they use for the Corvettes, and I think the Camaros and maybe the GTOs were like 3/4 of an inch. So this is going into a 65 GMA body, a GTO. So you need to move the harmonic balancer back just to give room for the electronic fans and the radiator and all that stuff. So that's the reason why we're doing it. Well, that was less of a pain in the butt than it was the first one I did, because I did that one on an engine stand. So it took me about a minute. Just used a good solid breaker bar, 1/2 inch drive, 5/16 socket, and about 3-4 feet of square tubing. It's got a good heavy wall on it, and didn't use a hammer, just put a little body weight to it, and it broke loose. So one thing on these bolts is make sure you throw that one away or use it for something else, because it's a one-time use only bolt, and ARP makes a nice replacement. And if I didn't show you before, when I showed all the parts, I will show that part number before I go ahead and put it in the new one. Now it's time to... When I did my Pontiac the first time, I had to pull my balancer off too. And back to the O'Reilly's loaner part program, they have this Chrysler harmonic balancer puller from Evertough 67005, and that's what I've actually used to remove the harmonic balancers. So this kit has a very sturdy 3-jaw, a couple rods to make up the distance back to the main crank itself, and then you just screw the bolt in and slowly work it out. We'll show you when we get it set up. One thing you'll need is some sort of rod. So these are too short to go in the end of the crank and actually bottom out in the crank. So just happen to find, I'm not even sure what it is, it's just a rod, and this will fit on the outside of the surface, give me something to push against so that I can pull that harmonic balancer off. So let's see if this works. And there you have it. One harmonic balancer removed. So the truck harmonic balancer is now removed from the engine. As you can see, the truck harmonic balancer In the Corvette harmonic balancer, you can see that 1.5 inches, approximately, whatever it is. In the Corvette harmonic balancer, it's from GM. You can see the part number there. I just got it from Summit. And this is the harmonic balancer bolt kit for the LS motors. And it's ARP number 234-2503. So we'll get that ready and install that. The ARP instructions say to step 4, lubricate the threads of the bolt, the underhead of the bolt, and the face of the balancer where the washer contacts the balancer with the torque lube, which we have here, and then tighten to 235 foot-pounds. I think the spec is like, you can check out a website, but it's like 65 plus 110 degrees, so we will see what we have to do that with. Have the bolt and washer all lubed up, along with the threads, and then I just put a little bit inside the harmonic balancer to get it started. Now these do not have a key on them, and the other thing is if you're using them in high RPM applications, they do have a where you can drill through and actually pin the harmonic balancer to the crank, but since this is a street engine, we're just going to leave it factory. Another thing I've done is just got some engine oil and put it around the sealing surface on the harmonic balancer, and also put some on the seal itself and the front cover. That way you don't have to have less of a problem of potentially damaging that seal. Then you have to take everything back off. That seal leaks to replace it. So just put a little engine oil on it. It should be good to go. Use an 1/1/16 12-point socket. Had to tap the balancer on a little bit lightly until it got some good thread engagement, and then just slowly pulled it down until it touched. So right now it is just snug, and we'll do the final torque here in a second. Another great site for reference for torque specs is this ls1howto.com, and the person has put all of the specifications on there. So since my torque wrench doesn't go to 250 foot-pounds or 265 foot-pounds, the initial pass we do about 240, about 37 foot-pounds, and then the final pass we do 140 degrees. So I will get that set up and take care of that. So we are now all torqued. So what I did was probably torqued it to about 140 with my torque wrench, and then released the torque on it, torqued it back to 37, and then put a big brake bar on it and went about 120, 140 degrees. And you need about a 4-foot cheater bar in your breaker bar, and just be careful, because if it pops off, you're going to know it. The next thing I do before I start putting everything back together, so what I'm going to do next is put the flywheel back on with the new ARP bolts, is check to make sure the rear main seal is good. So it's very easy to change that right now. All you have to do is take these two bolts out through the oil pan. Of course, take these bolts out, but one thing you have to be careful about is aligning that. So they make some special tools to align it, and I don't know if the newer seals actually have an alignment in there, but just want to make sure that that seal is centered on there, or you can have some leak out of the rear main seal. But since this one's still good from the factory, we're going to leave it alone, and I know we're going to take the oil pan off so we can clean all that up when we take the oil pan off, but otherwise, looks good to go. Cleaned all the mating surfaces up and installed the original flex plate. And then one thing you want to look for is make sure you line up that dowel hole. I don't know if the bowl holes are offset so that you can't put it on wrong, but I would just line up the dowel hole to the hole in 7th hole in the flex plate, put the bolts in, and torque them to spec. So just reviewed the specs for the flex plate bolts, and first pass we'll do 15, the second pass we'll do 37, and final pass we'll do 74. Of course, there's a breaker bar on the other side, and just make sure that you do them in a crisscross pattern, kind of like you're bolting a wheel on a car. Here's the next piece of the puzzle for the engine swap, which is an intake manifold fuel rails, throttle body, all that good stuff. A couple of pieces missing, but we'll talk about those in a minute. So what I usually do on these is completely strip them. This one here, I'm probably not going to use the fuel rail because it's a returnless, so you only get the fuel coming in. And the problem is in the south is that you can still get some heat in there that builds up under the hood, especially when it's hot. It can vaporize the fuel. So I like to use the returnless or return system, which will have two pipes. So I'll just take this off. I've got another rail that I'll use. And also check out the fuel injectors, make sure they match with the ECU that I'm going to use. Also going to need one that has the fuel pressure regulator tap on it, so we'll get that. Everything else will pull off, so the manifold air pressure is already off. This will just go ahead and plug, which is the evap system. We'll reuse the throttle body. Of course, we'll clean this up also. Looks like we need a new hose over here. Nice thing on this one, it's a newer one, so the EGR port is already blocked off from the factory, but usually you just stick a freeze plug in there from the block. So we'll get this apart, and I'll show you what I do for cleaning. So we've got everything apart. One little suggestion, because the fuel injectors probably have never been out since they put it in the factory, so I use a little bit of white lithium grease and rotate them around back and forth, and they'll come out a lot easier. And I had to do the same thing on the fuel rail itself. Got the hoses off from the throttle body. Living in the south, we really don't have to use that. It's they just pump a little bit of engine coolant through there, so it keeps it from freezing in the wintertime, and we don't have that problem. So I got the fuel injectors. Now on the fuel injectors, what you want to do is clean those up really good, and then replace the O-rings top and bottom, which are pretty easy to come by. As you can see, that one's already missing. And then look down through the top of the fuel injector with a light when they dry out, and if you see any contamination or dirt or anything, and there's a little screen in there, little filter, make sure you blow that out with some carb cleaner or fuel injector cleaner. Another thing I'll do is just fill up a little tank with fuel injector cleaner and just let them sit in there a couple days before you use them, because one of the worst things you want to worry about, stuck closed from varnish, is not a big deal, but if they get stuck open, you can hydrolock your engine. And we get a little farther along in the process, I'll show you a very dangerous procedure, but it's something that I use to make sure that they work well. Besides that, the intake manifold is cleaned off. I still have to pull the gaskets off, but one thing that you want to do is clean it really, really well, because you are using a PCV valve, which sucks the crankcase pressure and anything that's in the crankcase up through and reburns it. So you end up with a lot of oil buildup and stuff on the runners and that. So I'll just run a bunch of degreaser down there, hit it with a water hose for a while, put it in the sink, and then let it set for a couple days and flip it back and forth and blow it out with an air hose. That way you can make sure you get all the water out of the intake. But when you're doing that, check for cracks, anything else that might be a problem, and they should be good to reuse. So this, the rear knock sensor out of the engine, probably had failed. You can see the amount of rust on there, and then there's a huge crack on the bottom. So I've been sitting in the water for a while, and that one probably doesn't work anymore. And also when I tried to take the electrical connector off, that completely broke. So this is the front one, not as badly damaged. Probably reuse that again for something else, but this is what a new one looks like. So I've got two and a new wiring harness, and we'll be installing it now. One little hint when you're installing your new harness for your knock sensors is pull the rubber cap back a little bit and press down on this to make sure it's tight, because I tried to do it with just the cap one time and had to take the intake off in a truck, and it wasn't fun. So do it right the first time, learn from my mistakes. So I'm getting ready to clean the intake manifold. That's the front where the throttle body goes, and these are the two pieces of foam. So this is the foam that actually traps the water in and causes the damage to that knock sensor. So when you take these out, the most important thing to do with them is throw them in the garbage can. Do not put those back in, or you're replacing another $50 knock sensor, or whatever they're at online now. So getting ready to clean this up. Completely stripped it. I'll go ahead and pull all the bolts out, pull all the sensors out, and even pull the little plug for if you're gonna, which will take this out if you need for vacuum for your master cylinder power booster. So we get cleaned up and show you what it looks like. Trying a little something different. I'm using dishwashing soap and water, and then just a big tote I had laying around the shop, just to get into the cracks and crevices a little bit better, the intake ports and that. I'm just going to let this set for a couple hours and see what it looks like. If that doesn't work, I'll just hit it with my normal degreaser. Got the intake all cleaned out and dried out, and tried to polish up on a little bit on the outside, but you can't get them perfectly clean. Put new gaskets in, which you should always do because those get a little soft. The Velcros are really nice. And bolted it all down. You just need to snug them down. There's a shoulder on the bottom of the bolt, so just do a crisscross pattern like if you were doing a head, and do two or three sets until all of them are just touching good, and then you can come back after you heat cycle it a couple times, just retorque everything. So that's it for the intake manifold. So I put the throttle body on and the gasket, and just got a little block off plate for the purge canister, and of course cleaned up and put in the manifold air pressure sensor. So where we're at now is getting ready to start putting the wiring harness on. So I'm waiting for some fuel injector O-rings, which you should always replace, because I even damaged a couple taking them out, and it's just safer to put new ones in for $12-15. Just replace the upper and lower O-rings, because you got to remember those are at the 59 or 61 psi. So just replace those. It's one less thing to worry about. Show you more in a minute.